Hey peeps! So something I always get a lot of questions about on my Instagram is things relating to how to get started in photography. So I thought I'd make a video on it. So let's start off by talking about gear. If you've ever looked at buying a camera, you'll know they are expensive, to say the least. Even for basic beginner setups, you can expect upwards of $400, which is a lot of money to put towards something you don't know if you're sure about. Now, I know this is cliche, but smartphone cameras these days are actually really good. And if you know what you're doing, you can actually take some really good stuff with them. And I'll talk about that more later in the video. But otherwise, if you do have a budget, a good place to start, or at least my personal recommendation, would be the Fujifilm X-A5. I love the Fuji system. My personal camera, which I'm shooting on right now, is the Fuji X-T2. And there are a lot of really economical lenses in the Fuji system that you'll be able to use even if you upgrade cameras. At the recording of this video, you can get this with a kit lens on Amazon for about $500. But if $500 is too expensive, I'd recommend the website DP Review for looking for cameras, lenses, etc. They're the best resource that I've found personally for that. And trust me, there are a lot of options out there. When you're taking photos, either with a dedicated camera or with just a smartphone, lighting is everything. My recommendation is to try to find natural, soft light, as it's generally the most flattering and forgiving type of light. For instance, as a general rule of thumb, don't take pictures outside when the noonday sun is out. The best time to take pictures is right around sunrise or sunset, otherwise known as golden hour, because you're going to be getting a lot of really soft, diffuse, natural warm light, which is exactly what you want. And the difference between noon and golden hour is actually really stark. Take a look at these two photos. Both taken, same location, same camera, same editing, but one was taken at golden hour and one was taken at noon. There's a really big difference. And this goes for both portrait photography and for landscape photography, because a lot of people, when they're thinking about shooting at golden hour, that kind of thing, they only think about, oh, I'll take portraits at golden hour and I can go out anytime to take landscapes. That is not true by any means. And of course, there will always be exceptions to the rules, and as you learn more, you can start to find those, but 99% of the time, everything's going to look better at golden hour. But again, as you learn more, you can learn when it's okay to break those rules. And another good option for portrait or just indoor photography specifically is window light. If you have just the non-direct sunlight streaming through the window, so you don't want direct sunlight, but just like the light of the outside, if you have that coming through the window, it'll make for a really soft and nice light. Now, what if natural light isn't an option? Which a lot of times it isn't. You can still get some really flattering light if you know what to look for. One of the easiest things to do is actually just taking like a flashlight or some other regular artificial light and bouncing it off like a wall or some other light surface. So if I was to shine this flashlight directly on me, it doesn't really make for flattering light. But if I bounce it off the ceiling, it actually looks kind of nice. And in a pinch, it could work really well, actually. Now, of course, you can buy studio lights. I am using a studio light right now. I have a couple. But when you're starting out, it doesn't really make much sense to spend the money on some studio lights because they can get expensive. Now, moving a little bit past just finding soft light, I have found that I really like having quite a bit of shadow in my pictures, actually, rather than just it being all lit up completely. It adds a certain moody quality to it that I just really think makes the images pop. The next big thing I would look at is composition. Now, I wouldn't recommend diving into the deep end of like the Fibonacci sequence or anything like that right at the beginning. I would just say try to keep your photos simple. That is the biggest thing you can do. Another thing I'll briefly touch on is focal length. Now, focal length is the measurement of how zoomed in a particular lens is. For various reasons, it's actually more flattering to have your camera all the way zoomed in and to be farther away from your subject than it is to be all the way zoomed out and closer to your subject. Take this for example. When I'm really close to the camera, it's far from flattering. My nose looks massive and my face looks pretty distorted. But if I take a step back and zoom in, it's much more flattering and I can almost fake looking attractive, but not really. Now on to possibly my favorite part of the process, editing. Now, editing is something I think your beginner photographer really tends to overlook or even look down on, like take the hashtag #NoFilter, for instance. But I believe it makes a massive difference in your photo quality. And I really find my own photographic identity in my editing more than anything else. And I use a program called Capture One to edit, but that's a subscription-based program. You have to pay, I think it is 20 bucks a month. But if you're starting out, don't do that. You don't need that. That's just for when you're starting to get a little bit more advanced, you want to learn a little bit more. In the beginning, I'd recommend you actually just use like a smartphone app. And the two I recommend are Lightroom Mobile and Visco, both of which are free. Now, there are only really 4 things you need to look at right at the beginning. Those are brightness, contrast, color balance, and filters if your app has them. And I'll use VSCO for an example because I use that the most when I'm editing pictures on my phone. First, go and choose a filter. I like to make sure I don't pick anything too overkill because I know that I'm going to be editing more later in the process. And then after picking a filter, I'll go increase the brightness and warmth of my photos just a little bit depending on the photo. And if I think it needs it, I'll pull the contrast up just a little bit. And then you can see just these couple things make a big difference in your images. So that's why I would always recommend editing your photos, even if it's just like 5 minutes spent on each photo or even less. Sometimes I spend even less time on a photo than that, but it always makes a big difference. Now on to smartphone specific tips. Now I think the thing we need to understand is smartphones definitely do have an inherent disadvantage when it comes to photography. The main disadvantages being color accuracy, grain, and contrast. But we can get around those or even use them to our advantage at times. First and foremost, grain. Because of the way smartphone cameras work, because of their small sensors, they come out with images that have a lot of grain generally, especially in low light. And from a technical point of view, that definitely is a bad thing. You're losing some detail and you're adding elements into your image that weren't there originally. But on the creative side of things, it's actually something you can use. Grain is something that a lot of photographers will actually add to their images, myself included, to create a certain amount of ambiance to your photos because it mimics film. Now, if you're a seasoned photographer, you know there's a big debate about like digital grain versus film grain, and I'm not going to go into that here. We don't need to worry about that yet. That's something that you can worry about later on. But say you still don't want grain in your photos. What you just want to do is use as much light as possible, keeping in mind that soft light is going to look better most of the time. Now, contrast. Light grain, it really depends on how much light you have because the darker it is, the more contrast there's going to be. But like I said earlier, I personally really like when there are a lot of shadows in my images. So contrast isn't necessarily too big of a problem for me. As long as you keep the skin tones well exposed, meaning they're not too bright or they're not too dark, I think you'll generally be fine with having a lot of shadow in your images. And then on to color accuracy. Color accuracy is actually really easy to correct when you're editing. You just go into the white balance section and you just adjust things until things look as natural as possible. Again, emphasizing skin tones because that's where we're trying to get the most natural. And those are all of my tips. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the comments below. I'll try to answer them as best I can. Also, if you'd like to see any specific videos relating to photography, leave a comment. And just for a little update, so I am leaving on my mission to Japan on October 16th, which is really coming up now. And I'll be taking a lot of photos, but I won't have access to social media, meaning I won't be able to post on YouTube or Instagram at all for the 2 years. So essentially, be warned, I'm just gonna have to take a 2-year hiatus while I'm doing that, which I know is a long time, and I know I just came back, but that's just gonna be how it is. I'm also considering doing a live stream, and if I found a good time for that, just look and there will be a pinned comment on the top of the comment section saying the date and time that I'll be doing that. Like and subscribe if you like this video and want more like it. Thanks for watching, and adios, amigos.